afternoon. Do you hear me? Martin? Glasnevin Cemetery. Hope you're all feeling comfortably. As you can see from the screen, Minister for Arts, Heritage, Culture and the Gaeltacht, Heather Humphreys TD, accompanied by the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland, the Right Honourable Theresa Villiers, is about to arrive, and would you please stand to welcome them. Ladies and gentlemen, please be seated. It's my pleasure now to introduce you to the Chairman of Glasnevin Trust, Mr. John Green, to welcome you to Glasnevin Cemetery.
Lord Mayor of Dublin, Lord Mayor of Belfast, Secretary of State, Ministers, representatives of the regional governments, representatives of local government, members of the diplomatic corps, honoured guests. You are all most welcome to Glasnevin Cemetery, a place where, from our founder Daniel O'Connell to Michael Collins and Eamon de Valera, from our cholera plot to our angels plot, you can experience Irish history as in no other place. You're especially welcome today to the unveiling of the Cross of Sacrifice and to commemorate the outbreak of war 100 years ago. We are only now disseminating the full impact of World War I on this island, when 1 in 6 volunteered, over 200,000, and of those 200,000, 1 in 5 died. A devastation of a nation, a devastation that was mirrored across Europe and much further afield. Today is about remembrance. It's about acknowledging our shared past, our shared history on this island and in these islands. So not only do we welcome representatives from Belfast, but we welcome representatives from London, Scotland, Wales, the Isle of Man, Guernsey and Jersey. Today is also about aspiring to reconciliation, recalling the words of Willie Redmond as he wrote to Arthur Conan Doyle about building up a bridge over the graves of those who fought together between North and South. And later, in a letter to his pal John Horgan, He said, "My men are splendid. We are pulling famously with the Ulster men. Would to God we could bring this spirit back to Ireland." Tom Kettle, Dubliner, Nationalist MP for East Tyrone, founder Irish Volunteers, Royal Dublin Fusilier, and poet. He wrote about the relationship between England and Ireland in Reason in Rhyme, but these three lines are pertinent to any post-conflict. "And when you your banquet make, and we come, soldier to equal soldier we must sit, closing a battle, not forgetting it." The World War was a world war. It encroached on so many lives all over the world, and we welcome here today representatives of all the participating nations, cognizant of the fact that some of them are still struggling with the terms of that peace. And we also acknowledge their suffering and their loss. To the victor of the spoils, I think not in this case. King George V stood in Flanders Field shortly after he had signed the Government of Ireland Act and said, "Could there be more potent advocates of peace than this mass multitude of silent witnesses to the desolation of war?" It's hard to find comfort in anything about the First World War. Yes, in Black Horse Avenue and all over the world on Anzac Day, those magnificent words of Ataturk are repeated. Those heroes that shed their blood and lost their lives. There is no difference between Johnnies and Mehmets to us as they lie side by side. There is nothing triumphalist, nothing judgmental about these services. In Ireland, they are part of a decade of centenaries, a decade in which we remember, we celebrate, and we commemorate, a decade that ended in independence and in retention of the Union. 31st of July, 1917, Passchendaele. Francis Ledwidge, Meath man, Royal Inniskilling Fusiliers, 36th Ulster Division, died. He was horrified by what he saw in Belgium and by what he saw or heard of in Dublin. He has left us a lot to think about, but my favourite lines are this ditty, which are just sad now because they're just as aspirational today as they were 100 years ago. "Oh, what a pleasant place the world would be, how easy we'd skip through it, if all the fools who meant no harm could only manage not to do it." Lest we forget, may they rest in peace. I now have the pleasure of introducing Minister for Arts, Heritage and the Gaeltacht, Heather Humphreys.
On the centenary of the war that consumed Europe and the wider world, we gather here to dedicate a memorial to the soldiers from Ireland who lost their lives in that conflict. The flickering images of newsreels catches images of soldiers and civilians, mostly unknown, and give us an insight into their time and experience. The most striking fact of the Irish involvement in the First World War is the huge number of Irish who enlisted, fought valiantly, and made the ultimate sacrifice by losing their lives. Those who went to fight could not have envisaged the changed world that would exist at the end of the war. The reasons for enlisting were as varied as the individuals who went to war. Some joined out of economic necessity, Others had the hope that the experience of serving side by side against a common enemy would forge friendships and would transcend the historic differences. For many people today, the centenary of the World War relates to the life of their parents, grandparents, and their siblings. The soldiers of the war are not anonymous or forgotten within their families. I hope that in the coming years, these private memories will be brought forward, that we may acknowledge all this important strand of our history. Even as the World War continued, it was realised that the terrible legacy would require special new arrangements for the welfare of soldiers and the remembrance of the dead. The founding of the forerunner of the Commonwealth Graves Commission in 1917 and the Royal British Legion in 1921 were the beginning of a continuing acknowledgement of service and loss in war. Since their foundation, these two remarkable institutions have provided their support to all British service personnel, including so many thousands from Ireland. The Cross of Sacrifice monument before us today is the latest expression of a partnership between the Commonwealth Graves Commission and the Glasnevin Trust, a voluntary body originally established by Daniel O'Connell in 1828, and encompasses 124 acres and 1.5 million burials. It is our national memorial centre and developing an impressive education programme for visitors. It is here, in the context of all the other elements of our modern history and the history of the Irish in the World War, that will be explained and the memory of our soldiers respected. Across Europe, arrangements are being made to bring to mind in the coming days the tragedy and sadness of a war that destroyed a generation. I am greatly encouraged for the future that nations are coming together in remembrance of the horror that so divided them. Partnerships that rise above narrow traditions and transcend the divisions of the past will contribute to a better future. Thomas Kettle, the former Nationalist MP for East Tyrone, who served and was killed as a lieutenant in the 9th Royal Dublin Fusiliers, believed that, used with the wisdom which is sown in tears and blood, this tragedy of Europe may be and must be the prologue to the two reconciliations of which all statesmen have dreamed: the reconciliation of Protestant Ulster with Ireland and the reconciliation of Ireland with Great Britain. The unveiling of this cross marks a further step in the ever-improving relationships between our two islands. I offer my thanks to all involved in the preparation of this monument and congratulate them on their achievement. Gur maith give go léir.
Thank you, Minister Humphreys. It's my pleasure to introduce you to the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland, the Right Honourable Theresa Villiers, and ask her to address you.
Minister Humphreys, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, it is a very great honour for me to be back here at Glasnevin Cemetery for the dedication of this Cross of Sacrifice. I'm very grateful to the Glasnevin Trust and to the Commonwealth Graves Commission, both of whom do a magnificent job, for their kind invitation to be here today along with the Minister. I hope that this will be the first of many events at which she and I attend together on behalf of our respective governments during this centenary period. In March this year, Jimmy Deanahan and I were here at Glasnevin to take part in the ceremony to lay the foundation stone for this magnificent structure. And the completed monument is a truly fitting tribute to those Irishmen who gave their lives during the Great War that we commemorate today. Indeed, only yesterday when I met the new Irish Foreign Minister, Charlie Flanagan, in Belfast, he was full of pride that the cross comes from his Laois constituency. In a few moments, we'll see the cross dedicated by His Royal Highness the Duke of Kent, President of the Commonwealth Graves Commission, and by the President. This is a further illustration of the closeness of the relationship between the United Kingdom and the Republic of Ireland. It's a relationship taken to new levels by Her Majesty the Queen's visit here in 2011 and the President's return visit to the UK earlier this year, both of which were hugely successful examples of the warmth and friendship between our two countries. And the presence of His Royal Highness and the President also underlines the determination of both the UK and Irish governments to commemorate the Great War and the events of the wider decade of centenaries in Ireland in a spirit of mutual respect, inclusiveness and reconciliation. As we all know, World War I took place against a background of huge political changes in this island, from the Ulster Home Rule crisis to the 1916 Rising and eventually partition and civil war. For that reason, the stories of thousands from the nationalist tradition who made the supreme sacrifice wearing the uniform of the British Army were, until recent times, largely kept hidden. And yet the war touched families from the whole of the island of Ireland, north and south, Unionist and Nationalist, Catholic and Protestant. I'm reminded of that when, as Secretary of State, I've represented the UK government at the annual remembrance services on the 1st of July of the Somme. These include the profoundly moving services which take place at the Ulster Tower to commemorate those from 36th Ulster Division and at Guillemont for the 16th Irish Brigade. And it's right and proper that the Irish government and the Irish Defence Forces are fully represented at those ceremonies so that the sacrifice of all Irishmen is fully recognised. This is a key priority for the UK and Irish governments and the Northern Ireland First World War Centenary Committee, so ably chaired by Jeffrey Donaldson MP. Together we are working to encourage and enable people from all sections of the community in Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland to share and remember their own family stories from the war. I'm hopeful that this is a real opportunity to explore a shared past which can contribute to reconciliation and enhance prospects for a shared future. The construction of this magnificent cross of sacrifice means that from today onwards, people from Ireland, north and south, will have a place to come together in quiet contemplation, to pay tribute to the memory of those who together gave so much for our freedom. And I reiterate what a great honour and privilege it is for me to be here today representing Her Majesty's government. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, we have many unique and first-time occasions here today. Musical entertainment and ceremonies are provided by the Army No. 1 Band and the Band of the Corps of the Royal Engineers, along with the Irish Army Pipers. And I'm sure they're going to entertain us now for a few minutes while we wait for His Royal Highness and his party to arrive here.
Stop. Repeat. Let them run. Start. Broad. Chassis. Rush.
Ladies and gentlemen, His Royal Highness, Duke of Kent has just left the museum building. Is passing by the Church of the Resurrection and has reached the saluting point for the Captain's Guard of Honour, and will be with us here in a few moments. With him the Gentlemen, would you warmly welcome the Duke of Kent? Please be seated. I would like to hand you over now to Captain Ciara Gubbins of the Irish Defence Forces, who will take you through the rest of the ceremony today.
Your Royal Highness, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, An Tuachtaráin will shortly arrive on parade. You are invited to stand.
Front! Front! Up! Hello, party! General Split! Release hands! Up! Cardinora! Cortes de Tuachtaráin! Madigan! Out!
The national colours will now march to their positions at the Cross of Sacrifice.
Mellenrod! Leading! On! Mellenrod! Stop and feed! Tussig, Gamar, Marshall!
Ladies and gentlemen, you are invited to take your seats.
It's my privilege to formally welcome President Michael D. Higgins and Sabina and His Royal Highness the Duke of Kent, President of the Commonwealth Graves Commission, to Glasnevin Cemetery, and to assure them that the spirit of reconciliation that is in here does spread far and wide beyond these walls. Dr. Edward Madigan, historian at Royal Holloway University, friend of Glasnevin Trust, and former resident historian at the Commonwealth Graves Commission, will now address us on the context of ceremonies and the First World War.
I had the great honour of working for the Commonwealth Graves Commission for about 2 years, and during that time it was my privilege to be closely involved with the project to install a cross of sacrifice here at Glasnevin. Before I joined the Commission, I felt I had a good intellectual understanding of the social and military dynamics of the Great War. But it wasn't until I started working for the Commission and regularly visiting military cemeteries in France and Belgium, and indeed in Britain and Ireland, that I came to appreciate the immense human cost of the war. War, first and foremost, is a military endeavour, and the essence of that endeavour is killing. Visiting the final resting places of those who have lost their lives in war reminds us of this essential truth. It also hopefully reminds us of those who were left behind when men joined the forces and failed to return home. Every Commonwealth War Graves Commission headstone you see here at Glasnevin, or indeed anywhere in the world, represents a dead serviceman, the final resting place of a dead serviceman. But it also represents a lost husband or brother or son and a family in mourning. As an Irishman, I've been particularly struck over the past number of years by the extent of Irish sacrifice during the First World War. Many of the British cemeteries in Flanders and on the Somme contain dozens of graves of fallen Irish soldiers, men who served in the Royal Dublin Fusiliers, the Royal Enniskillings, the Connacht Rangers, the Irish Guards, and other illustrious regiments. But when we think of the dead of the First and Second World Wars, I think we're still inclined to think of them as being out there, near the battlefields on which so many of them lost their lives, in France and Belgium and Gallipoli and further afield. We perhaps forget that thousands of British and Irish soldiers who died as a result of service during the First World War were buried on the home fronts of these islands. Most of these men were badly wounded overseas. They were sent home for treatment and subsequently died of their wounds. Others were killed during the Easter Rising in 1916, and others again were drowned when the vessels they were being transported on were sunk off the Irish coast. Approximately 3,000 servicemen of the First World War, most of them Irish, were buried across the island during and immediately after the conflict. Glasnevin Cemetery is the final resting place of just over 200 of these men. Many of these Irish soldiers and sailors came from very underprivileged backgrounds and were buried in poor ground plots, often in unmarked graves. Now, in the 1920s and 30s, a cross of sacrifice was installed in most of the new military cemeteries established by the Imperial War Graves Commission, as it was then known. Designed by the renowned architect Sir Reginald Blomfield, the cross of sacrifice represents the Christian faith of the majority and the human sacrifice of all the dead of the British Empire. These simple stone crosses, embedded with a bronze sword, can be found in cemeteries across the globe wherever Commonwealth servicemen were laid to rest during and after the two world wars. The one exception to this, up until today, was the Republic of Ireland. Although over 2,600 men who died as a result of service during the First World War are buried in the 26 counties, the installation of crosses of sacrifice was unwelcome in the political and cultural climate of the 1920s, in what was then the Irish Free State. In the past 20 years or so, of course, there has been a remarkable resurgence of interest in and empathy for the Irishmen who served in the First and Second World Wars. The advent of the peace process in Northern Ireland and a marked improvement in Anglo-Irish relations has definitely contributed to this. So it was felt that the time was perhaps right to propose the installation of a cross of sacrifice in the Republic. The idea was very warmly received both by the Irish government and by the Glasnevin Trust, which now has an extremely close relationship with the War Graves Commission. And that is essentially what brings us here today for this historic, momentous occasion in the history of Anglo-Irish relations and relations between the different traditions within Ireland herself. And it is especially fitting that this remarkable cross of sacrifice be installed here at Glasnevin, this Irish Valhalla, that the men who are buried here, and indeed the Irishmen who died in two world wars, who are buried across the world, are remembered alongside their compatriots who gave their lives in the struggle for Irish independence. Many of these men believed they were fighting for Ireland. That certainly was the view of Emmett Dalton, who himself is buried here in Ireland, who's in Glasnevin, who served in the 16th Division and later on served in the Irish Republican Army. Now, I'd just like to close with a very brief poem from a young Irishman who was killed in West Flanders in 1917. This is War by Francis Ledwidge. Darkness and I are one, and wind and nagging thunder, brothers all. My mother was a storm. I call and shorten your way with speed to me. I am love and hate and the terrible mind of vicious gods. But more am I. I am the pride in the lover's eye. I am the epic of the sea. Thank you.
For over 80 years, Glasnevin Cemetery and the Commonwealth Graves Commission have had a relationship, masterfully facilitated by the Office of Public Works. In 2007, a government-funded restoration programme overseen by the Office of Public Works commenced in Glasnevin Cemetery. Our relationship with the Commission evolved into a partnership, and as Dr. Madigan has outlined to you, we have erected Commission headstones on previously unmarked graves, poor graves, and also put up some 48 Gallipoli markers on family graves. Our relationship with the Commission culminates now in their gift to this cemetery and to the people of Ireland of this cross of sacrifice. A cross of sacrifice which will enable those relatives of people buried here to remember their loved ones. But because of its proximity to the grave of Charles Stewart Parnell, each and every tour that is taken round the cemetery will see this magnificent cross, and it will enable us to tell part of the story of World War I. So I want to thank the Commonwealth War Graves Commission through their President, His Royal Highness the Duke of Kent, and to ask him to address us.
Mr. President, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. In 1918, as the Great War still raged, the newly formed Imperial, now Commonwealth, War Graves Commission was just embarking on its noble task to bring order and permanence of commemoration to those who died and were dying in service both at home and abroad. By the end of the war, the Commission will be responsible for commemorating over 1 million dead. Among their number, 50,000 Irish men and women whose graves and memorials will be found from the green fields of Flanders to the arid beaches of Gallipoli. Wherever Irish men and women served, in virtually every corner of the globe, the graves of Erin's sons and daughters are in our care. But here, in the land of their birth, we are gathered today to dedicate this cross of sacrifice, not just in memory of the 208 buried here, but in remembrance of all those who died, no matter where they came from, or where they fell, or how they met their deaths. The cross of sacrifice is a familiar feature of war cemeteries, and yet this is the first to be erected in the Republic of Ireland. It has been achieved following a joint initiative between the Commonwealth War Graves Commission and the Glasnevin Trust, ably supported by our friends in the Irish and British governments, for which we are extremely grateful. It is also fitting that the site for this monument is here, where the Commission and the Trust have worked so closely together in recent years to mark and honour the graves of servicemen and women who died in the 2 world wars, and where the Commission's own far-sighted principles on equality of treatment and permanence of commemoration, still treasured by us to this day, are echoed in the founding mission of the Trust to care for the graves of those of all religions and none. What then is the need of what we do today, and what is its significance? I can find no better words than those penned by Sir Frederick Kenyon in his report to the Imperial War Graves Commission of 1918 on the design of the cemeteries, when he emphasized the importance of recognizing the spirit of service and self-sacrifice in all that the Commission did. As he wrote, "The one essential symbol is the cross, and I have no doubt that great distress would be felt if our cemeteries lacked this recognition and this symbol of the self-sacrifice made by those who lie in them. For the great majority, the cross is the symbol of their faith, which they would wish to see in the cemeteries where their comrades or their kinsmen lie. How fitting, then, that we are gathered here today to complete that task, when in just a few days our nations will gather together to commemorate the 100th anniversary of the First World War. It has been my privilege, as President of the Commonwealth War Graves Commission, to take part in many occasions such as this, and to speak about the memorial itself or the service and sacrifice of those whose names are commemorated. To do so is an honor, as I know how much we owe to those who died, and I value the opportunity to acknowledge it publicly. It is right and fitting that we should honor their memory. But what we do here today goes far beyond the dedication of this memorial or the recording of the names of those who died. We also commemorate the spirit of friendship and common remembrance of the dead that we gathered here share and will continue to share in the years to come. It is in that shared spirit that I would like to pay special tribute and express the Commonwealth Graves Commission's admiration and gratitude to you, Mr. President, to the Irish Government, public and the Glasnevin Trust, all of whom have done so much to support our work of commemoration and remembrance in Ireland. In the years to come, it is my hope that memorials such as these inspire successive generations to remember, so that our remembrance is as solid and perpetual as the Irish limestone of which this memorial is formed.
President Higgins' own family history is a microcosm of the complexity of our history in this period. And perhaps consequently, few have a greater knowledge and interest of this period. So it is my privilege to introduce the President of Ireland, Michael D. Higgins.
Your Royal Highness, here na wera Ari is Rooney Stott, Tailuri, ambassadors, Count Orna agus Oglach na Heron, Chief of Staff and members of the Defence Forces, representatives of the British Forces, a wheel the Untavus Glas Neon, members of the Glasnevin Trust, representatives of the Commonwealth Graves Commission, a Guinea Cora Fought, Gwini Ushla. On an occasion such as this, we eliminate all the barriers that have stood between those Irish soldiers whose lives were taken in the war, whose remains for which we have responsibility, and whose memories we have a duty to respect. San olumad oigna fut na chiorpa, to glúl de iroige, cara tevle tev agus insna huig na kenish in fad, in a numlania atá ias partak an kagishin. In so many graves across Europe, the flower of a generation lies together, and all of their graves taken together hold the victims of war. We cannot give back their lives to the dead, nor whole bodies to those who were wounded, or repair the grief, undo the disrespect that was sometimes shown to those who fought or their families. But we honor them all now, even at a distance, and we do not ask, nor would it be appropriate to interrogate their reasons for enlisting. If they could come back, no doubt, they would have questions to ask as to why it was and how it came to be that their lives were taken. To all of them in their silence, we offer our own silence, without judgment and with respect for their ideals as they knew them, and for the humanity that they expressed towards each other. And we offer our sorrow too, that they and their families were not given the compassion and the understanding over the decades that they should have received. The suffering visited upon our own people, and for such a long time at home, had perhaps blinded our sight and hardened our hearts in so many ways. As His Royal Highness the Duke of Kent has just said, in his speech, the cross of sacrifice stands in cemeteries in the care of the Commonwealth Graves Commission throughout Europe, indeed across the world, from Flanders to Gallipoli. And as one in a web of many others, this monument reminds us that World War I was a war with a global reach, one that affected every part of the European continent, and that the Irish who fought in that war are an integral part of that history. In recent years, an increasing number of writers and scholars, religious and political leaders have redirected our gaze to the complexity of the Irish engagement with World War I, allowing in turn for a more inclusive remembering at public level. And as we are facing into that past, we are also progressing in our understanding of the complicated intertwining of loyalties which characterized Irish identities at the turn of the 20th century. This is facilitated by easier access to and a renewal of interest in the writings of Irish soldiers, their diaries, their notebooks, their letters, their poems. The line, "Not for flag, nor king, nor emperor," in the sonnet of Thomas Kettle, dedicated to his 3-year-old daughter Betty, 4 days before his death during the Battle of the Somme, or the poem of Francis Ledwidge, written in honour of his close friend Thomas MacDonagh while recovering from his wounds in Manchester in 1916, lend us a better sense of these men's multi-layered sense of belonging. Such writings throw light on the complex motives and circumstances that led so many Irishmen to volunteer to join the British Army. Whether it was a genuine belief in ideals driven by unionist or nationalist feelings, and within that, many different versions of each, whether it was escape from poverty, the search for adventure, a friendship network, or the continuation of a family tradition. It is not for us to rush to judge those who fought and their motivations. We should seek rather to show such respect for this complexity as does not suggest that we sink into some relativism or a glossing over of differences, some of them enduring and not easily reconcilable. 1 century later, the First World War remains somewhat of a mystery. Its origins are mysterious. So is its course. Why then, when the hope of bringing the conflict to a decisive conclusion why was it dashed within months of its outbreak? Did the combatants decide to persist, to mobilize for total war, and eventually to commit the totality of their young manhood to mutual destruction? All unavoidable questions. And if all wars are an object of infinite sadness, this particular one remains as an indistinguishable source of bewilderment. But while historians still struggle to ascribe a definite meaning to the First World War, we now, from the evidence of those who wrote it, we now see so clearly what it was that was sacrificed. Health, both mental and physical, youth, life itself. Huge destruction was inflicted on families and communities. A whole generation was destroyed that would have furnished their peoples with workers, farmers, scholars, artists, administrators, and political leaders. Not only did World War I bring human devastation and economic ruin to Europe, it shattered the notion of a progress facilitated by science, technology, and the promises of democracy. It put an abrupt end to the aspirations of any happy modernity and ongoing human improvement harboured by Europeans for the previous 40 years. Never such innocence again, the poet Philip Larkin put it in his poem 1914. So today, on the eve of the centenary of the outbreak of the First World War, we are invited to remember with authenticity and historical accuracy the sacrifice of so many Irish men and women who fought alongside soldiers from different nations, backgrounds, and social circumstances. We are invited to go beyond disputes as to the legitimacy of the various motivations and causes embraced by those men, in order to reflect together on what was lost for everybody in the destructive experience of war. We are here to remember with respect and dignity the great human loss of those years, and our duty is to mark the graves of all who have lost their lives, wherever they may be. And I wish to salute the invaluable work carried out by the Commonwealth Graves Commission and the Glasnevin Trust to ensure that this duty is fulfilled. The wall that stands before us lists 166 Commonwealth burials from the First World War. And I invite anyone who reads those names to reflect and give a moment in respectful memory to the individual stories that go with them. Each man had parents and friends, and many had a wife or a lover, children and siblings. And beyond the staggering statistics associated with World War I, a war whose casualties are numbered in millions, it is important, I believe, that we do justice to the dead by endeavouring to recover the human dimension of the experience of war, the tragedy of each single death, of every life shattered. And while it is hard for us to recover imaginatively what life in the trenches was really like, again, it is perhaps through reading the writings of the soldiers and their own words that we can best gain a better sense of the experience who fought and lived on the battlefields. The cold and damp, the confined space, the insipid food, the rats and lice, the deafening din of shelling for days on end, the fear, the stench of rotting flesh, of wading through fields of the dead, the muddy wasteland all around, the barbed wire and the burnt villages. And in the letters of soldiers home, in the memoirs too, some of them written after the war, we understand the harrowing character of a mechanical industrial war. We must surely be moved, any of us who are serious, by the great humanity those soldiers felt for each other in the face of an incredible carnage. In their letters, the combatants conferred the title of courage on each other, thus suggesting to us today to acknowledge agency on the part of the men and women of the past and to abstain from any portrayal of them as passive victims. These writings of World War I soldiers also call upon our contemporary responsibilities. The lessons not learned, not to leave the power and energies of nations, their formidable industrial capacity to be unleashed again and again for mutual destruction. Marfocal scair kun krieke coalition made it all our own. Finally, let me say how the welcome and significant progress of our understanding in Ireland for the period of the First World War has also given us a deeper empathy with the British people for whom World War I, its experience and its recall, form such an important element of their identity and mythology. And that is the reason why it is an honour to host a monument to that memory. Just as the generation that produced World War I soldiers had to leave behind the idiom of the 19th century, that language used for over a century to celebrate the idea and the hubris of progress. Today we are invited to leave behind some of the terms and concepts of the 20th century, such as its deadly grammar of binary divisions between the enemy and us. The time has come for an ethics of narrative hospitality, to replace our past entrenchments, that awful word bequeathed to us by an era scarred not just by the consequences of war itself, but by the effect of the very idea of war, of the possibility of total war on subsequent generations, from which we are not at this moment free. I want to thank you, sir, for your presence and for your words of recognition for the Irish men and women who were killed during the First World War. The ability to share sombre and profound national memories is an important statement and act of friendship and respect. As friends, we Irish and British share this moment of remembrance, and in mutual sympathy, we dedicate this monument to the memory of all those who lost their lives during the too long, dreadful years of 1914 to 1918. Let us now together cultivate memory as a tool for the living and as a sure basis for the future. Memory employed in the task of building peace.
An Tuachtarán and His Royal Highness will now take their positions in front of the Cross of Sacrifice. All guests are invited to stand.
Garnora, clean egg, arm. Prawn, Anna.
An Tuachtarán and His Royal Highness will now unveil the Cross of Sacrifice.
Contosi, Marshall. Garnora, ride full. Garnora, stand. Garnora, upbrag, arm. Garnora, Ashapeg, arm. Garnora, arm, I sampaha, lay.
The head chaplain of the Irish Defence Forces, Monsignor Owen Tyne, and the Assistant Chaplain General of the British Forces, Reverend Ian Evans, will now offer prayers.
Most gracious and loving God, hear our prayers for all who strive for peace and all who yearn for justice. May we who today remember the cost of war work for a better tomorrow as we commend to you lives lost in terror and conflict. May this monument, this cross of sacrifice, be a reminder of all Ireland's war dead who fought and died in World War I and World War II. May we never forget the sacrifices they made and the suffering they endured as they dwell at last in the realm of perfect peace. We ask God's blessing on this cross of sacrifice. May it honour those of all faiths and none who have gone before us and inspire us to be instruments of peace and end the scourge of war. We make this prayer in the name of God, the most gracious, the most merciful. Amen.
Most merciful and ever-living God, we remember those whom you have gathered from the storm of war into the peace of your presence. We hold before you those whose memory we cherish, and those who laid down their lives in the service of humanity on land, at sea, or in the air. Loving Lord, bless them in your eternal peace. Give them rest where the righteous repose, and where the light of your countenance keeps watch. Let the sounds of strife, the cries of battle, the wounds of war be calmed for all time in your loving and endless mercy. Being ever reminded that we who are left behind honour their commitment and sacrifice, we now commend them to your loving care. So grant, most merciful God, that we, being faithful till death, may receive with them the crown of life that never fades, through Christ our Lord.
Amen.
Amen.
Ladies and gentlemen, the Minister for Arts, Heritage and Gaeltacht.
I now invite the President of Ireland and His Royal Highness the Duke of Kent to lay wreaths in memory of the soldiers from Ireland who died in the World Wars.
1 minute of silence will now be observed.
Peace heads. Arms. Garnora, upbrag, out! Garnora, upbrag, out! Garnora, target, out!
On behalf of Glasnevin Trust, it's my honour to thank President Higgins and Sabina for attending today, and to thank President Higgins for his remarkable, if not unexpected, speech. I would also like to thank His Royal Highness the Duke of Kent, President of the Commonwealth Graves Commission, for travelling over, for overseeing the handover of the cross, and for speaking from the heart about the Commonwealth Graves Commission and what it means to him and to us. There are many people who have to be thanked today, and I will be as brief as I can. But without the help of Minister Humphreys and her team, and the team from the Northern Ireland office, and Ambassador Chilcott and the British Embassy, without the work of Claire McGrath and the OPW, this event quite simply would not have happened. The time and effort put in by the Defence Forces on this has been exceptional, and I want to thank the Chief of Staff in particular for their support and their unbelievable commitment to this. In the background, the Garda Síochána have worked quietly and effectively as ever, and there are many, many others, and if I have omitted you, I apologise. And my last thank you is to the staff of Glasnevin Trust and the Commonwealth Graves Commission, to Deirdre Mills and her team, and to George McCullough and his team for the way they have worked together to ensure that this event happened.